My sister stood up at Easter dinner, champagne glass raised, and declared she was the only successful person in our entire family, dismissing my decade of sacrifice, our brother's military service, and everyone else's achievements as cute hobbies. But when our grandfather slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, the smug smile vanished from her face in an instant. What was in that will that made my sister's face drain of all color, and why had Grandpa been secretly watching us all these years? I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I should have known Easter dinner at the Riverside estate would end in disaster. My grandfather, William Smith, had insisted on hosting despite being 87 and recently recovering from pneumonia. The sprawling colonial house sat on 12 acres in Charlottesville, Virginia, with its magnolia trees in full bloom and the Blue Ridge Mountains painting the horizon. Grandpa had made his fortune in commercial real estate during the 1970s, buying up warehouses and industrial properties when everyone else wanted shopping malls. He'd never remarried after Grandma Dorothy passed in 2003, dedicating himself instead to his 3 children and 7 grandchildren. My name is Camilla Smith, and at 32, I was the middle grandchild. I'd spent the last decade working as a trauma nurse at Richmond General Hospital, pulling double shifts during the pandemic while completing my master's degree in nursing administration. The bags under my eyes had become permanent fixtures, and my scrubs collection outnumbered my regular clothes 3-1. But I loved my work, even when it drained every ounce of energy from my body. My older sister, Victoria Smith, had flown in from Manhattan the night before. At 35, she was a corporate attorney at Silverman & Associates, one of those glass tower firms where junior associates billed 300 hours a month and senior partners drove cars worth more than most people's houses. Victoria had always been the golden child, valedictorian at the University of Virginia, full scholarship to Columbia Law, made partner at 33. She wore her success like armor, each achievement another plate added to protect herself from ever appearing vulnerable. Our younger brother, Nathan Smith, was 28 and serving as a captain in the Army Rangers. He'd been deployed to Afghanistan twice and had a Purple Heart he never talked about. Nathan was on leave for 2 weeks, his first time home in 14 months. The military had carved away the soft edges of the boy who'd once collected comic books and built elaborate Lego cities in the basement. Now he moved with careful economy, his eyes constantly scanning rooms even during family dinners. The dining room table could seat 16, but only 9 of us gathered that Easter Sunday. Besides Grandpa, Victoria, Nathan, and me, there was our father, Richard Smith, our mother, Susan, our Aunt Patricia with her husband, George, and our cousin Dylan, who'd driven down from Richmond. The table was set with Grandma Dorothy's china, delicate porcelain with hand-painted roses that had survived 5 generations of family meals. Crystal glasses caught the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Mom had prepared honey-glazed ham with roasted vegetables, her famous scalloped potatoes, and fresh dinner rolls. Grandpa sat at the head of the table, quieter than usual, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. He'd always been sharp as a tack despite his age, but something felt different today. His blue eyes held a weight I'd never noticed before, moving from face to face as though memorizing each of us. Victoria dominated the conversation, as she always did. She'd just closed a merger worth $80 million, and the story required detailed explanation of every negotiation tactic, every clever legal maneuver, every moment she'd outmaneuvered opposing counsel. Nathan listened politely, occasionally glancing at his phone. I picked at my potatoes, exhausted from a 72-hour shift that had ended only 6 hours ago. A patient had coded twice during my watch, and I could still feel the phantom rhythm of chest compressions in my arms. The senior partners were actually shocked, Victoria said, cutting her ham into precise, identical pieces. They'd never seen someone turn a hostile acquisition into a friendly merger so quickly. Davidson from corporate litigation said it was the most elegant legal strategy he'd witnessed in 20 years. That's wonderful, honey, Mom said, though her smile seemed strained. She'd been a high school English teacher for 30 years before retiring, and I knew she struggled with Victoria's need for constant recognition. "How was Afghanistan?" Victoria asked Nathan, the question casual, almost an afterthought inserted between bites of asparagus. "Hot," Nathan replied, his standard answer. He never elaborated, never shared details. The 1,000-yard stare appeared for just a moment before he blinked it away and reached for his water glass. Victoria turned to me. "And you're still at Richmond General? Still doing the night shifts?" The condescension in her voice was subtle, expertly calibrated. To anyone else, it might have sounded like genuine interest. But I'd grown up with Victoria. I knew how she weaponized words, how she could make still sound like unfortunately and night shifts sound like couldn't find anything better. "I'm actually heading the new trauma protocol development team," I said quietly. "We've reduced patient mortality rates by 18% over the last year." "Oh, that's nice," Victoria said, the words sliding past her lips like oil. "Very noble work. I always admired people who can do public service jobs. The pay must be challenging, though." I felt my jaw tighten but said nothing. This was Victoria's specialty, the backhanded compliment, the subtle dismissal wrapped in appreciation. She'd perfected it over decades, an art form designed to elevate herself while appearing gracious. Aunt Patricia tried to change the subject, asking about Dylan's new job at an architectural firm. But Victoria interrupted with another story about Manhattan, about a charity gala she'd attended where she'd sat next to a former Secretary of State. The table had become her stage, and we were merely the audience required to validate her performance. Then came dessert. Mom brought out her legendary coconut cake, 7 layers of perfection that had won the county fair 3 years running. Coffee was poured. The conversation had settled into a lull, that comfortable post-meal quietness where everyone's too full to talk much. That's when Victoria stood up. She raised her champagne glass, the crystal catching the late afternoon light. Her designer dress, something navy that probably cost more than my monthly rent, hung perfectly on her frame. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled in loose waves that looked effortless but had probably required an hour of work. "I want to make a toast," she announced, her voice carrying that courtroom authority she'd cultivated. Everyone turned to look at her, forks pausing midway to mouths, coffee cups suspended in air. "Looking around this table," Victoria continued, her eyes sweeping across us with something that might have been pity, "I'm filled with gratitude. Gratitude that I was given the drive, the intelligence, and the determination to actually make something of myself, to build a real career, to achieve actual success in a competitive world." My stomach dropped. Nathan's expression went carefully blank, the same face he probably wore when receiving bad intelligence in the field. Mom's hand tightened around her coffee cup. Dad's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. "Let's be honest," Victoria said, her smile sharp as broken glass. "I'm the only real success story here. And I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's true. Some of us work night shifts at hospitals, which is admirable but hardly impressive. Some of us follow orders in the military instead of giving them. Some of us taught high school English for 30 years instead of pursuing actual intellectual challenges." The room had gone completely silent. Even the sounds from the kitchen seemed to have stopped, as though the entire house was holding its breath. "So here's to me," Victoria raised her glass higher, "for being the one who actually made it, the one who refused to settle for mediocrity, the one who—" "Victoria," Grandpa's voice cut through her speech like a knife. It wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority. The voice of a man who'd built an empire from nothing and commanded respect through sheer force of will. She turned to him, her smile faltering for just a moment before she recovered. "Grandpa, I was just—" "Sit down," he said quietly. The champagne glass lowered. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. She sat, her face flushed, confusion mixing with indignation in her eyes. Grandpa reached into his jacket pocket with deliberate slowness. His weathered hands, hands that had signed 1,000 property deeds, hands that had built a fortune through decades of calculated risks, pulled out a manila envelope, slightly worn at the edges as though it had been handled many times. "I think," he said, his blue eyes sharp and clear despite his 87 years, It's time we talked about what success actually means. The manila envelope sat on the table in front of Grandpa William, positioned precisely between his coffee cup and dessert plate. Nobody moved. The silence stretched like pulled taffy, becoming uncomfortable, then unbearable. Victoria's champagne glass had left a small wet ring on the tablecloth, a perfect circle that seemed to grow larger in my peripheral vision. Success, Grandpa said, the word falling into the quiet like a stone into still water. That's an interesting concept, Victoria. I've been thinking about it quite a lot lately, especially during those long nights after the pneumonia. When you can't sleep and you're sitting in a dark room, you start asking yourself questions. Hard questions about what really matters. He picked up the envelope, but didn't open it. His fingers traced the edges, a gesture that seemed almost unconscious, born from repetition. I've been watching all of you for years. Really watching. Not just showing up for holidays and birthdays, but paying attention to who you've become, how you treat people, what choices you make when you think nobody important is looking. Victoria's face had gone pale. Her carefully cultivated composure was cracking at the edges, small fissures appearing in the mask. She opened her mouth to speak, but Grandpa raised one hand, a simple gesture that commanded immediate silence. I built my first warehouse in 1973, he continued, his voice steady despite his age. Portsmouth Industrial Center, 40,000 square feet of concrete and corrugated metal on a lot everyone said was worthless because it flooded every spring. I paid $22,000 for that property. Everyone thought I was insane. Dad shifted in his chair. We'd all heard this story before, but something felt different about the telling this time. Grandpa wasn't reminiscing. He was building toward something, each word placed with the precision of a lawyer presenting evidence. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I worked 16-hour days for 2 years to make that property profitable. I learned plumbing because I couldn't afford a plumber. I taught myself electrical work from library books because hiring an electrician would have bankrupted me. Your grandmother Dorothy would bring me dinner at the site because I refused to stop working long enough to eat at home. She'd sit with me on overturned buckets, both of us covered in dust and paint, and she'd tell me about her day teaching second graders at Oakwood Elementary. Mom smiled faintly at the memory, though she'd been too young to remember those days. Grandma Dorothy had taught for 34 years before retiring, touching hundreds of children's lives with her patience and creativity. By 1975, I owned 3 properties. By 1980, I had 12. By 1990, I'd built a portfolio worth $8 million. And you know what I learned during all those years? Grandpa leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes intense. Money is easy, making money, accumulating wealth. That's actually the simplest part of life. It's just patterns and patience, risk calculations, and timing. Any reasonably intelligent person with discipline can build wealth. He paused, letting that statement sink in. Victoria's jaw tightened imperceptibly. What's hard, Grandpa continued, is building character. Maintaining integrity when it costs you something. Treating people with dignity when they have nothing to offer you in return. That's the real measure of a person. Nathan had gone very still, his military training evident in the way he'd positioned himself to watch everyone at the table simultaneously. His hand rested near his water glass, but I knew he wasn't thinking about drinking. He was processing, analyzing, preparing for whatever was about to unfold. I've watched Camilla, Grandpa said, and my heart jumped at the sound of my name. For the last 10 years, she's worked herself to exhaustion, taking care of people who will never know her name, never thank her, never remember that she was the one who held their hand during the worst moment of their lives. Last October, I came to Richmond General for a procedure, minor thing, routine endoscopy, and I told them not to mention to anyone that William Smith was there. I wanted to see the hospital as it really was, not as they'd present it to a major donor. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. Grandpa had been at my hospital? I'd had no idea. I watched Camilla handle a cardiac emergency in the hallway, he said, his eyes meeting mine. A 53-year-old man collapsed right outside the cardiac unit. She was there in seconds. I watched her perform CPR for 11 minutes straight while coordinating with the code team, giving clear commands, never panicking, never giving up. They got his heart beating again. She saved his life. My throat tightened. I remembered that day, Gerald Morrison, father of 4, who'd been visiting his wife in post-op when his own heart gave out. He'd walked out of the hospital 3 weeks later. After it was over, Grandpa continued, I watched Camila go into a supply closet and cry for 2 minutes. Not because she was weak, but because she cares so deeply that every patient becomes personal. Then she wiped her eyes, fixed her ponytail, and went right back to her shift. She had 9 more hours ahead of her. Victoria stared at her plate, her expression unreadable. I've watched Nathan too, Grandpa said, turning to my brother. He doesn't talk about Afghanistan, doesn't share the details of what he's seen or done. But I have friends, old business associates with military connections. I made some calls. I learned about a checkpoint incident in Kandahar province where Captain Nathan Smith's convoy was ambushed. 3 vehicles, 18 soldiers, surrounded by hostile fire. Nathan's face had gone carefully blank, that 1,000-yard stare threatening to return. Nathan took shrapnel in his left shoulder and right thigh, Grandpa said quietly. But he didn't evacuate. He held his position for 4 hours, coordinating air support and maintaining defensive lines until reinforcements arrived. His commanding officer said he saved 12 lives that day through his leadership and refusal to abandon his team. The Purple Heart was for the wounds. The Bronze Star with Valor device was for the heroism. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's eyes went wide. We'd known about the Purple Heart, but Nathan had never mentioned a Bronze Star. He sat frozen, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Success, Grandpa said, the word heavy with meaning. These are successful people. They've succeeded at the things that actually matter, saving lives, protecting others, sacrificing their own comfort for something larger than themselves. He turned his attention back to Victoria. His expression wasn't angry exactly, more disappointed the way a teacher looks at a gifted student who's wasted their potential. I've watched you too, Victoria, he said, and I've seen brilliance, real, genuine brilliance. You have gifts most people would kill for, a razor-sharp mind, extraordinary analytical abilities, the kind of charisma that makes people listen when you speak. You could have done anything with those gifts. Victoria's hands were clasped in her lap, knuckles white. I've also made some calls, Grandpa continued. Talked to people who know people at Silverman and Associates. I learned some interesting things, like how you billed a pro bono case to a paying client last year to inflate your hours. How you threw your paralegal under the bus when you missed a filing deadline that was entirely your responsibility. How you told the hiring committee that Jennifer Martinez wasn't a cultural fit for the firm because you didn't want competition for the partnership track. Victoria's face flushed scarlet. Those are lies. Jennifer Martinez is now a senior associate at Morrison and Fletcher, Grandpa said calmly. She's doing excellent work, by all accounts. Work she could have been doing at your firm if you hadn't sabotaged her application because you saw her as a threat. The words hung in the air like smoke, Aunt. Patricia looked uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. Uncle George studied his coffee cup with sudden fascination. Dylan, my cousin, sat motionless, clearly wishing he'd stayed in Richmond. Success built on undermining others isn't success at all, Grandpa said. It's just ambition without ethics, intelligence without wisdom. And the most tragic part is that you didn't need to do any of it. You're talented enough to have made partner on your own merits. But somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that winning meant making sure everyone else lost. Victoria's eyes glistened, but whether from shame or anger, I couldn't tell. You don't understand how competitive corporate law is, she said, her voice strained. You have to fight for every advantage. You can't just be good. You have to be better than everyone else. And sometimes that means making hard choices. Hard choices, Grandpa repeated softly. Is that what we're calling it? Making sure a qualified colleague doesn't get hired because she might outshine you, Blaming your mistakes on subordinates who can't defend themselves. Those aren't hard choices, Victoria. Those are character failures. The words struck like physical blows. I'd never heard Grandpa speak this harshly to anyone in our family. He'd always been the diplomatic one, the peacemaker, the man who smoothed over conflicts with gentle humor and wisdom. But there was no humor in his voice now, only a kind of sorrowful clarity. "I'm 87 years old," he said, and for the first time he sounded tired. "The pneumonia last month was worse than anyone told you. The doctors gave me a speech about getting my affairs in order, which is what they say when they mean you're running out of time. So I started thinking about legacy, about what I want to leave behind and to whom." He lifted the manila envelope. "This is my will, the final version, signed and witnessed 2 weeks ago. It supersedes all previous versions." My heart started pounding. Nathan's expression remained neutral, but I saw his fingers tighten slightly around his water glass. Victoria's entire body had gone rigid, her breath coming quick and shallow. "I've spent the last 6 months restructuring my estate," Grandpa said, "making decisions about how to distribute assets worth approximately $43 million. Properties, investments, cash holdings, everything Dorothy and I built together." 43 million. The number seemed impossible, even though I'd known Grandpa was wealthy. Hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way it had never been before. "I considered many factors," he continued. "Financial needs, certainly, but also character, values, how each of you has lived your life, what you've done with the advantages you were given, how you've treated people who couldn't help you climb any ladders." He set the envelope back on the table, unopened. "I'm not going to read this entire document right now. It's 47 pages of legal language that would bore everyone to tears. But I'm going to share the basic distribution because I think Victoria's toast demands a response, a truthful one." The room had become so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat, a rushing sound in my ears like standing too close to ocean waves. Mom had tears in her eyes. Dad looked stricken, clearly torn between supporting his daughter and processing the revelations about her behavior. "The Riverside Estate," Grandpa said, gesturing to encompass the house around us, "including its 12 acres and all contents, will go to Richard and Susan, my son and daughter-in-law. This has always been the family home, and it should remain so." Dad nodded slowly. Mom wiped her eyes with her napkin. "The commercial property portfolio, currently consisting of 19 buildings with a combined value of approximately $21 million, will be placed in a trust. That trust will be managed by a board of 3 trustees, with Camila as the primary trustee." The words didn't register at first. Then they hit like a wave, drowning out everything else. Me, primary trustee of $21 million in property? "Camila will receive 40% of all rental income from the trust in perpetuity," Grandpa continued. "Nathan will receive 30%, Patricia will receive 20%, and Dylan will receive 10%. Victoria's face had drained of all color. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. "The remaining assets, cash, stocks, bonds, and personal effects, will be distributed as follows." Grandpa pulled a piece of paper from the envelope, reading glasses perched on his nose. $500,000 to Nathan for his continued service and sacrifice. $500,000 to Patricia and George, who have always been there for this family without asking for recognition. $250,000 to Dylan to help him establish his architectural practice. He paused, looking up from the paper. His eyes found Victoria, and I saw something that looked like sadness there, mixed with disappointment. $100,000 to Victoria Lynn Smith, with the stipulation that $50,000 of that amount must be donated to organizations that support paralegals and legal support staff in professional development. $100,000. Out of $43 million, Victoria, the successful one, the golden child, the corporate attorney who'd made partner at 33, was receiving $100,000. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the house itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the explosion that was surely coming. Victoria stood up so fast her chair tipped backward, clattering against the hardwood floor. Her face cycled through expressions: shock, disbelief, rage, humiliation, each emotion playing across her features in rapid succession. "This is insane," she said, her voice shaking. "This is absolutely insane." "You're giving the bulk of your estate to a nurse and a soldier? To people who've accomplished nothing compared to what I've built?" "Sit down, Victoria," Grandpa said, his voice still calm. "No." She planted her hands on the table, leaning forward. "No, I won't sit down. I won't accept this. You're punishing me for being successful, for having ambition, for refusing to settle for mediocrity like everyone else at this table." "I'm not punishing you for success," Grandpa replied. "I'm holding you accountable for how you achieved it. There's a difference." Victoria's laugh was bitter, almost hysterical. "This is unbelievable. You're telling me that saving lives at an inner-city hospital is worth more than building a legal career at one of the most prestigious firms in the country, that following orders in the military is more impressive than actually becoming a partner?" "Yes," Grandpa said simply. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." The word hung in the air between them, final and immovable as stone. Victoria grabbed her champagne glass, and for a moment I thought she might throw it. Instead, she drained it in one long swallow, her hand trembling. When she set it down, the crystal clinked against the china plate with a sharp, discordant sound that made everyone flinch. "You know what this is really about?" Victoria's voice had taken on a dangerous edge, the courtroom attorney emerging fully now. "This is about resentment. You've always resented that I got out, that I refused to stay in small-town Virginia, working small-town jobs, living small-town lives. You wanted me to be like Dad, content with middle management at the paper mill, or like Mom, spending my life grading essays about summer vacation." "Victoria," Dad's voice was low, warning. Mom's face crumpled, tears spilling over despite her attempt to maintain composure. But Victoria was beyond stopping. The dam had broken, and years of carefully controlled superiority came flooding out in a torrent of bitter words. "I worked myself half to death to escape this. 4 years of undergrad with a 4.0 GPA, 3 years of law school where I slept 4 hours a night, 10 years at Silverman where I billed more hours than any other associate in the firm's history, and for what? To be told I'm worth less than a nurse who couldn't hack medical school?" "That's enough," Nathan said quietly. His voice carried the kind of authority that comes from having men's lives depend on your orders. But Victoria wheeled on him, her eyes blazing. "Oh, the war hero speaks," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Tell me, Nathan, how does it feel to be rewarded for being a government employee? Because that's all soldiers are. Government employees with guns. You follow orders, collect a paycheck, and everyone acts like you're special for doing your job." Nathan's face remained impassive, but I saw the muscle in his jaw jump, his hands resting on the table curled slowly into fists. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, each word carefully controlled. "Don't I?" Victoria laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Let me guess. You think you're protecting freedom? Defending democracy? You're protecting oil interests and corporate investments? But sure, wrap yourself in the flag and pretend you're a hero." "Stop it." The words came from my mouth before I could think. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "Just stop talking." Victoria turned her attention to me, and I felt the full force of her contempt like a physical blow. "And you, Saint Camilla, the martyr nurse, tell me something. How many of those patients you saved would have survived anyway with any competent medical care? You act like you're special, but you're just doing your job. The only difference is you chose a job that lets you feel morally superior while making poverty wages." "I make $78,000 a year," I said, my voice shaking. "Plus benefits. That's not poverty." "It's nothing," Victoria snapped. "I made $340,000 last year, not counting my bonus. My apartment in Manhattan costs more per month than you make in 3 months. I drive a car that costs more than you'll make in 2 years. That's success, Camilla. Real, measurable success. Success measured in what? Grandpa's voice cut through the room again. He hadn't raised his voice, but something in his tone commanded immediate attention. In square footage? In the prestige of your zip code? In how much you can make other people feel small? Victoria spun back to face him. Success measured in achievement, in building something, in rising above where you started and creating a life that matters. You think your life matters more than Camilla's? Grandpa asked. More than Nathan's? Yes, Victoria said, the word coming out like a challenge. Yes, I do. I'm sorry if that's uncomfortable to hear, but it's true. In 10 years, 20 years, my work will have impacted hundreds of businesses, thousands of jobs, millions of dollars in economic activity. What will their work have impacted? Some patients who would have been helped by any other nurse? Some soldiers who would have followed any other captain's orders? 2 weeks ago, Grandpa said, his voice steady despite Victoria's outburst, I had lunch with Margaret Chen. Do you remember her? Victoria's expression flickered, confusion replacing rage for just a moment. No. She was your roommate at UVA freshman year, before you requested a single room second semester because you said she was dragging down your study environment. A flush crept up Victoria's neck. That was 15 years ago. How is that relevant? Margaret told me something interesting, Grandpa continued. She said you had a chemistry midterm scheduled the same day as her grandmother's funeral. She asked if she could borrow your notes from the lectures she'd miss while traveling to Pennsylvania for the service. Do you remember what you told her? Victoria's face had gone pale again. I don't remember every conversation from college. You told her you'd worked too hard on those notes to just give them away, Grandpa said. That if she wanted to pass the class, she should have better time management. Her grandmother had been sick for months. She should have studied ahead. The room had gone completely silent again. Even the ambient sounds from outside, birds singing, wind in the magnolia trees, seemed to have stopped. Margaret failed that chemistry exam, Grandpa said. She lost her scholarship. She had to leave UVA and transfer to community college because her family couldn't afford tuition without the scholarship money. She eventually finished her degree, but it took her 6 years instead of 4, working full-time while taking classes at night. That wasn't my responsibility, Victoria said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. I wasn't her keeper. She made her own choices. You're right, Grandpa agreed. You weren't responsible for her passing her classes, but you actively chose, to make her life harder during one of the worst moments she'd ever experienced. Not because helping her would have cost you anything, but because you saw her as competition. Even then, even at 18 years old, you'd already decided that success meant making sure everyone else failed. He pulled another piece of paper from the envelope. Should I go on? Because I have more examples. There's your former assistant, Rachel Kim, who you fired 3 days before Christmas because she politely corrected an error in your brief, an error that would have cost your client the case if she hadn't caught it. There's Todd Harrison, the junior associate you humiliated in front of the entire litigation team because he suggested a different negotiation approach that turned out to be right. There's... Stop, Victoria's voice cracked. Just stop. But Grandpa didn't stop. There's the time you told your mother her poetry was cute but amateur when she asked for your opinion on her work. There's the time you didn't come home for Dad's surgery because you had a deposition that could have been handled by any other associate. There's the time you told Camilla she'd wasted her potential by settling for nursing instead of becoming a real doctor. Each revelation hit like a hammer blow. I remembered that conversation. It had been at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Victoria had cornered me in the kitchen, glass of wine in hand, and delivered a 20-minute lecture on how I'd given up too easily, how if I'd just pushed harder, I could have been a physician instead of just a nurse. I'd gone home that night and cried for 2 hours. You've built your success on a foundation of cruelty, Grandpa said, and the sadness in his voice was unmistakable now. Not intentional cruelty, perhaps, but cruelty nonetheless. You've spent so much energy proving you're better than everyone else that you forgot to be. Good. Victoria sank back into her chair, her legs seemingly unable to support her anymore. Her face was streaked with tears. She hadn't even realized she was crying. I just wanted to make you proud, she whispered. I wanted to be somebody. You could have been somebody wonderful, Grandpa said gently. You have gifts, Victoria, real gifts, but you use them to tear people down instead of building them up. And that's why the bulk of my estate is going to your siblings. He turned to look at me, and I saw moisture in his eyes, the first time I'd ever seen my grandfather close to crying. Camila works 16-hour shifts and comes home exhausted, but she still volunteers 2 Saturdays a month at the free clinic on Monroe Street. She doesn't put it on her resume or talk about it at family dinners. She just does it because people need help and she can provide it. I felt my throat constrict. How did he know about the free clinic? I'd never mentioned it to anyone. Nathan sends half his military salary to the families of soldiers who served under him and were killed in action, Grandpa continued. He's been doing it for 3 years. The Army doesn't require it. Nobody would know if he didn't. But he does it anyway because he feels responsible for their sacrifice. Nathan's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He stared straight ahead, not meeting anyone's eyes. That's character, Grandpa said. That's what I built my fortune for, to pass it on to people who will use it to make the world better, not just to make themselves feel superior. Victoria's shoulders shook. She covered her face with her hands, and for the first time since we were children, I saw my sister completely break down. The polished attorney vanished, replaced by something raw and broken. I didn't know, she said through her tears. I didn't know I was like that. I thought I was just being strong, competitive, successful. Being strong doesn't require making others weak, Grandpa said. Being competitive doesn't require sabotaging your opponents. Being successful doesn't require stepping on people to reach the top. Mom got up and moved toward Victoria, maternal instinct overriding the hurt from earlier insults. She put her hand on Victoria's shoulder, and my sister flinched, but didn't pull away. I've made mistakes, Victoria said, her voice barely audible. So many mistakes. I've hurt people. I've been cruel. I've been everything you said. Yes, Grandpa agreed. You have. The simple acknowledgement seemed to hit Victoria harder than any accusation. She looked up at him, mascara streaking her face, her carefully constructed image completely demolished. So that's it? I'm just written off, condemned for being ambitious? No, Grandpa said, and something in his tone made everyone pay attention. You're being given exactly what you need, a wake-up call. $100,000 is still more money than most people will ever inherit. But it's not enough to coast on. It's not enough to make you feel like you've won. It's enough to make you think about what winning actually means. He stood up slowly, age evident in the careful way he pushed himself out of his chair. At 87, every movement required deliberation. The terms of your inheritance include a condition I haven't mentioned yet. In order to receive the $100,000, you must spend the next year, 365 days, working for a nonprofit organization at no more than $40,000 annual salary. You must stay for the full year. If you quit, if you're fired, if you try to do the minimum and coast, the money goes to charity instead. Victoria's head snapped up. What? You can't be serious. I make $340,000 a year. You want me to give that up for $40,000? I want you to learn what it means to work for something other than money and status, Grandpa said. I want you to spend a year helping people who can't help you back. I want you to experience what it's like to be powerless, to be the one asking for help instead of the one controlling everything. This is insane, Victoria said, but the conviction had drained from her voice. I'll lose my partnership track. Silverman doesn't do sabbaticals. If I leave for a year, I'm done there." "Then you have a choice to make," Grandpa said simply. "Your career or your inheritance, your path or a new one." He walked around the table, moving slowly, but with purpose, until he stood behind my chair. His hand rested on my shoulder, warm and solid. "I'm not punishing you, Victoria. I'm giving you a chance to become the person you could have been. The person I know is still in there, buried under years of ambition and fear." "Fear?" Victoria looked up, confusion and anger warring in her expression. "I'm not afraid of anything." "You're terrified," Grandpa said gently. "Terrified of being ordinary, terrified of being invisible. Terrified that if you stop achieving for 5 minutes, everyone will realize you're not as special as you've convinced them you are. So you keep climbing, keep competing, keep tearing down anyone who might expose that fear." The words landed like physical blows. Victoria's face crumpled again, and this time she didn't try to hide it. "I don't know how to be anything else," she whispered. "I've been this person for so long. I don't know how to stop." "Then learn," Grandpa said. "Take the year, take the job. See what happens when success isn't measured in salary and status. See what happens when you're just another person doing good work for people who need it." He pulled out one final document from the envelope. "This is a list of 5 organizations that have agreed to hire you for 1 year at $40,000, contingent on your grandfather's estate funding, legal aid clinics, homeless shelters, domestic violence, advocacy centers. Choose one. Start within 30 days of my death. Complete the full year, then you get your inheritance." Victoria took the paper with shaking hands. She stared at it as if it were written in a foreign language. "Or," Grandpa said, "reject the condition. Walk away. Keep your partnership track, keep your apartment, keep your life exactly as it is. The money goes to charity, and you never have to question whether success means what you think it means." He moved back to his seat, lowering himself carefully into the chair. The effort seemed to have exhausted him, but his eyes remained clear and focused. "The choice is entirely yours, Victoria. It always has been." The grandfather clock in the corner, a beautiful antique that had belonged to Grandma Dorothy's parents, ticked loudly in the silence. Outside, the sun had begun to set, painting the Blue Ridge Mountains in shades of orange and purple. Easter dinner had turned into something none of us could have anticipated when we'd sat down to honey-glazed ham and scalloped potatoes hours ago. Victoria sat with the paper in her hands, tears dripping onto the list of organizations. Her champagne glass sat empty beside her plate. The woman who had stood up to proclaim herself the only success at this table had been reduced to this: a broken, crying figure holding a list of low-paying jobs at organizations she'd probably never even heard of. And somehow, in that moment, I saw my sister more clearly than I had in years. Not the corporate attorney, not the golden child, not the arrogant, cruel person she'd become. Just Victoria. Scared, lost, and finally, maybe for the first time in her adult life, unsure if she'd been running toward something or just running away. The grandfather clock struck 7. The chime echoed through the dining room, marking the passage of time that seemed both impossibly fast and painfully slow. Victoria still held the paper, her fingers creasing the edges. Nobody had moved. Nobody had spoken. We were all frozen in the aftermath of truth, like survivors of an earthquake waiting to see if the ground would shake again. Aunt Patricia cleared her throat softly. "I think," she said carefully, "maybe we should give Victoria some space. This is a lot to process." "No." Victoria's voice was hoarse from crying, but there was something different in it now. Not the sharp edge of superiority, but something quieter, more genuine. "Don't go. I need to say something." She set the paper down and wiped her face with her napkin, smearing mascara and foundation. Without her makeup, she looked younger, more vulnerable, more like the sister I remembered from childhood before ambition had hardened her into someone unrecognizable. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, and the words seemed to cost her something. "I'm sorry to everyone at this table, Mom, for saying your teaching didn't matter, Dad, for dismissing your work, Nathan, for what I said about your service. Camila, for, her voice broke, for everything, for years of everything. Mom was crying openly now. Dad's hand covered hers on the table, his thumb making small circles over her knuckles. Nathan remained still, his face unreadable, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the possibility of it. I've spent 15 years running, Victoria continued, her words coming faster now, like a confession held too long. Running from being Richard Smith's daughter from the paper mill, running from being the girl whose mom taught high school, running from anything that felt ordinary or small. I convinced myself that if I just achieved enough, earned enough, rose high enough, I'd finally feel like I was enough. She looked at Grandpa, and the raw pain in her expression made my chest ache. But it never worked. No matter what I accomplished, it was never enough. There was always someone with a bigger office, a more prestigious client, a higher salary. So I just kept running faster, working harder, cutting down anyone who got in my way. Because if I stopped, if I slowed down even for a second, I'd have to face the fact that I was still just me, still just the girl from Charlottesville who was terrified of being invisible. Grandpa's expression softened, but he didn't interrupt. This was Victoria's moment, her reckoning with the person she'd become. I hurt Margaret Chen, Victoria said, each name another weight added to her confession. I hurt Rachel Kim. I hurt Todd Harrison. I've hurt so many people, and I told myself it was just business, just competition, just what you had to do to succeed. But it wasn't business. It was fear. Fear that if I wasn't better than everyone else, I was nothing. The admission hung in the air, raw and honest. I thought about all the times Victoria had made me feel small, all the backhanded compliments and dismissive comments. Understanding her motivation didn't erase the hurt, but it added context, showed me the scared person hiding behind the armor of achievement. I don't know if I can do what you're asking, Victoria said to Grandpa. A year at a nonprofit, giving up everything I've built, it terrifies me. The thought of not being partner Victoria Smith at Silverman and Associates, of just being another person doing ordinary work, it makes me want to throw up. That's honest, Grandpa said. That's the first genuinely honest thing you've said all evening. Victoria laughed, a broken sound mixed with tears. You want to know what's really pathetic? Part of me is already calculating, already thinking about how to spin this. I took a sabbatical to give back, to reconnect with my values. How to make even this look good on a resume. How to turn redemption into another achievement to put on my list of accomplishments. At least you're aware of it, Nathan said, speaking for the first time in what felt like hours. His voice was neutral, carefully controlled. That's more self-awareness than you've shown in a decade. Victoria turned to him, and I saw fear in her eyes. Fear that she'd destroyed this relationship beyond repair. I said terrible things about your service, about what you've done. I don't have any excuse. I was angry and lashing out, but that doesn't make it okay. Nathan studied her for a long moment. His fingers drummed once on the table, a tiny movement that betrayed tension beneath his controlled exterior. You're right, he said finally. You don't have an excuse, but I've seen people face hard truths before. Some of them run from it. Some of them actually change. The question is which one you're going to be. I want to change, Victoria said. I want to be better. I just don't know if I can. None of us knows if we can do hard things until we try, Nathan replied. Every mission I've ever run, I went in uncertain. The difference between success and failure is whether you commit fully or hold back part of yourself as an escape route. The words settled over Victoria like a challenge. She picked up the paper again, scanning the list of organizations. Legal Aid Society of Virginia, she read aloud. Charlottesville Women's Shelter, Youth Advocacy Center, Richmond Homeless Coalition, Veterans Assistance Network. Her voice caught on that last one. She looked at Nathan. Veterans Assistance Network, what do they do? Legal support for veterans navigating benefits claims, disability appeals, housing issues, Nathan said. The VA system is a nightmare. Most veterans can't afford lawyers. They get screwed out of benefits they've earned, end up homeless, fall through the cracks. Victoria was quiet for a moment. How many veterans? Thousands, Nathan said. Just in Virginia, probably tens of thousands who need help they can't get. Nationally, hundreds of thousands. I watched my sister's face as she processed this information. Something was shifting behind her eyes, some calculation happening that I couldn't quite read. If I chose that one, she said slowly, would you help me understand what they're dealing with? What they need? Nathan's expression remained neutral, but I saw the slight softening around his eyes. Yeah, he said. I could do that. Grandpa leaned back in his chair, and I saw satisfaction cross his face. This was what he'd hoped for. Not instant transformation, but the beginning of genuine consideration. The first crack in Victoria's armor. I need to think about this, Victoria said, setting the paper down again. I need time to process everything. The will, the conditions, all of it. Take the time you need, Grandpa said. But understand, I'm 87 years old with pneumonia damage to my lungs. The doctors told me I likely have a year, maybe 2 if I'm lucky. You don't have forever to decide. The reminder of mortality settled over the table like a cold fog. We'd all known Grandpa was old, but hearing him state his likely time frame so matter-of-factly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Mom made a small sound of distress. Dad's jaw clenched. I don't want you to die thinking I'm this person, Victoria said, fresh tears spilling over. This cruel, selfish person who only cares about money and status. Then show me something different, Grandpa said gently. Not through words, through choices, through actions, through how you spend the time you have left. Victoria nodded, unable to speak. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need air. I just need a minute. She walked quickly toward the French doors that led to the back terrace, pushing them open and disappearing into the evening air. Mom started to follow, but Dad put a hand on her arm, stopping her. Let her go, he said quietly. She needs to sit with this. The remaining family members sat in uncomfortable silence. Aunt Patricia and Uncle George exchanged glances, clearly uncertain whether they should stay or leave. Dylan looked like he wished he'd stayed home in Richmond. Nathan stared at his water glass, his thoughts unreadable behind his military composure. I found myself looking at Grandpa, really looking at him. The lines on his face seemed deeper than I'd noticed before, carved by decades of hard work and hard choices. His hands, folded on the table, showed age spots and prominent veins. He'd built an empire, raised a family, survived losing the love of his life, and now he was using his final years to try to teach his grandchildren what really mattered. Grandpa, I said softly, how long have you been planning this? He met my eyes, and I saw a weariness there that broke my heart. Since the pneumonia, he admitted. When I was in the hospital, struggling to breathe, I had a lot of time to think. About legacy, about what I wanted to leave behind, about whether I'd raised my grandchildren to be good people or just successful people. You did both, I said. You and Nathan turned out well despite my example, not because of it, Grandpa interrupted. I was so focused on building the business, on accumulating wealth, that I didn't spend enough time teaching you what to do with it. I assumed you'd figure it out on your own. You two did. Victoria didn't. He sighed, a sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. I saw the signs years ago. The competitiveness, the need to always be the best, the way she talked about other people. I should have intervened then. I should have sat her down and told her that success without character is just ambition in expensive clothes. But I didn't. I was proud of her achievements, and I let that pride blind me to what she was becoming. This isn't your fault, Dad said firmly. Victoria made her own choices. We all tried to talk to her over the years. She didn't want to hear it. Maybe she needed to hear it from me, Grandpa replied. Maybe she needed to know that the person whose approval she was chasing didn't actually approve, that I saw through the achievements to the methods, and the methods disappointed me more than any failure ever could have. Through the French doors, I could see Victoria standing at the terrace railing, her silhouette dark against the fading light. The Blue Ridge Mountains had gone purple in the distance, stars beginning to appear in the deepening sky. She stood perfectly still, and I wondered what thoughts were racing through her mind. Was she calculating how to salvage her career, or was she genuinely considering Grandpa's challenge? "Do you think she'll do it?" Nathan asked, his voice quiet. "Take the year?" "I don't know," Grandpa admitted. "I hope so. But hope and expectation are different things. She might decide her career matters more than $100,000. She might decide proving me wrong is more important than proving herself right. Or she might surprise us," Mom said softly. She'd always been Victoria's defender, always found ways to explain away her daughter's harsher edges. "People can change, even people who seem set in their ways." "They can," Grandpa agreed. "But they have to want to change more than they want to stay comfortable. That's the hard part. Choosing growth over comfort, challenge over certainty." The French doors opened, and Victoria stepped back inside. Her face was composed now, the tears wiped away, though her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. She'd removed her heels somewhere outside, standing barefoot on the hardwood floor in her expensive navy dress. Without the extra 3 inches of height, she looked smaller, less imposing. She walked back to her seat and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. "I have questions," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "About the conditions, about the year." "Ask them," Grandpa said. "Do I have to choose today? Do I have to decide right now?" "No, you have 30 days after my death to notify the executor of your decision and select an organization. You have 60 days to begin working there." Victoria nodded slowly. "And if I complete the year, what happens to the money?" "It becomes yours. No further conditions. You can invest it, spend it, donate it, whatever you choose. The point isn't controlling what you do with the money. The point is who you become while earning it." "What if I take the job and realize I can't do it?" Victoria asked. "What if I'm terrible at it? What if I fail?" "Then you fail," Grandpa said simply. "Failure isn't a character flaw. Quitting because something is hard, that's different. But struggling, trying, even failing while genuinely giving your best effort, that would teach you more than succeeding ever has." Victoria absorbed this, her fingers pleating the fabric of her dress. "The $40,000 salary, is that negotiable?" "No." "Can I supplement it with savings? Live off my own money while doing the work?" "Yes." "The point isn't to make you destitute. The point is to experience what it's like to work for an amount that reflects service rather than status." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question I knew had been building since Grandpa first pulled out the envelope. "Do you hate me?" The words were small, vulnerable, so unlike the confident attorney who'd stood to make her toast hours earlier. "No," Grandpa said, and the gentleness in his voice made my throat tight. "I love you. I've always loved you. But I don't like who you've become, and I'm heartbroken that I didn't do more to stop it. This—" He gestured to the envelope, the will, everything that had happened. "This is my last chance to help you find your way back to the person you could have been. The person I believe you still can be." Victoria's composure cracked again. Tears spilled down her cheeks, silent this time, without the hysteria from earlier. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm so scared of losing everything I've built." "I know," Grandpa said. "But maybe what you've built isn't worth keeping. Maybe you need to lose it to find something better." The grandfather clock chimed 8. Outside, full dark had fallen, the Blue Ridge Mountains invisible now against the night sky. Easter dinner had transformed into something none of us had anticipated. Not a celebration, but a reckoning. A moment where truth had been spoken and choices had been laid bare. Victoria sat with her tears and her fear and her decisions unmade. The rest of us sat with her, witnesses to her unraveling and uncertain participants in whatever came next. And in the center of it all, Grandpa sat with his manila envelope and his 87 years and his hopes that the people he loved might finally understand what he'd learned in a lifetime of building empires and losing what actually mattered. That success means nothing if you're successful alone. 3 hours had passed since Victoria's toast. The dining room had grown cold, the evening chill seeping through the old windows of the Riverside estate. Mom finally stood up and began clearing plates, the simple domestic action breaking the spell that had held us all frozen. Aunt Patricia joined her, grateful for something concrete to do with her hands. The sound of china clinking and silverware scraping felt almost obscenely normal after everything that had happened. Dad walked to the thermostat and adjusted the heat. Nathan disappeared into the kitchen and returned with coffee, setting cups in front of each person with military precision. Uncle George excused himself to make a phone call, his discomfort at being present for such raw family dynamics finally outweighing his sense of obligation to stay. Dylan followed him, muttering something about checking on their dog back home. Victoria remained seated, staring at the list of organizations Grandpa had given her. I watched her eyes move over the words again and again, as though repetition might reveal some hidden meaning, some loophole she'd missed on the first dozen readings. Her attorney's brain was working overtime, analyzing, calculating, searching for the angle that would let her keep everything without sacrificing anything. I knew because I'd watched her do it my entire life. Victoria had always been the problem solver, the strategist, the one who could find the third option when everyone else saw only two. But this time, Grandpa had designed the problem too carefully. There was no clever solution that let her bypass the hard choice. "Camilla," Grandpa said softly, drawing my attention. "Walk with me?" I stood immediately, grateful for the excuse to move. My legs had started to cramp from sitting so long. Grandpa rose more slowly, waving off Dad's offer of help with a gentle but firm gesture. He was old, not helpless, not yet. We walked through the house in silence, past the formal living room with its grand piano that nobody played anymore, past the library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with first editions and family histories, past the gallery of photographs showing 4 generations of Smiths in various stages of life. Grandpa stopped in front of one particular photo, a black-and-white image from 1978 showing him and Grandma Dorothy standing in front of the Portsmouth Industrial Center, his first property. They were both grinning, despite being covered in paint and plaster dust, her arm around his waist, his hand raised in a thumbs up to the camera. "She hated that warehouse," Grandpa said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Said it was ugly and cold and smelled like mildew. She was right on all counts. But she showed up every weekend with sandwiches and thermoses of coffee, sat on paint buckets with me, helped me plan the renovations. She never once suggested I give up or play it safe. I'd heard stories about Grandma Dorothy my whole life, but she died when I was 9, old enough to remember her warmth and her laugh, but too young to really know her as a person." "What would she think about all this?" I asked, gesturing back toward the dining room. "About the will, about Victoria." Grandpa was quiet for a moment, his eyes still on the photograph. "She'd think I should have done it 10 years ago, he said finally. "Dorothy always saw people more clearly than I did. She told me when Victoria was in college that we needed to worry about her. Said she was building walls instead of bridges, and that walls might protect you, but they also trap you." He turned away from the photo and continued walking, leading me toward his study. The room smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco, though he'd quit smoking 15 years ago. His desk was massive oak, scarred from decades of use, covered with neat stacks of papers and files. He lowered himself into his chair with a soft grunt. "I'm dying, Camilla," he said, no preamble, no softening of the truth. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. The pneumonia damaged my lungs more than the doctors initially thought. I have maybe 18 months if I'm lucky, less if I'm not." My throat constricted. I'd known, of course. He'd said as much at dinner, but hearing it stated so plainly in the quiet of his study made it unbearably real. "Grandpa." I need to know something, he interrupted gently. I need to know if I'm doing the right thing with Victoria. Part of me wonders if I'm being cruel, if I'm using my will as a weapon instead of a gift. I sank into the chair across from his desk, the same chair where I'd sat as a child while he told me stories about building his business, about taking risks and learning from failures. You're giving her a chance, I said. That's not cruel. Cruel would be writing her off entirely. Cruel would be letting her keep destroying herself and everyone around her without ever holding up a mirror. But am I doing it for her or for me? Grandpa asked, and the vulnerability in his voice shocked me. Am I trying to help her change, or am I trying to punish her for disappointing me? Because there's a difference, and I'm not entirely sure which one is driving this. I thought about that question carefully, knowing it deserved more than a reflexive answer. I think, I said slowly, it can be both. You can be disappointed and hurt by who she's become and still want to help her find her way back. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Grandpa leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. Your grandmother used to say that love without accountability isn't really love. It's just enablement wrapped in sentiment. I've been thinking about that a lot, wondering if I enabled Victoria by never confronting her, by being so proud of her achievements that I ignored her methods. You're confronting her now, I pointed out. Better late than never. Am I too late? The question hung between us, heavy with the weight of his mortality and Victoria's potential. I don't know, I admitted, but I know she needed to hear what you said tonight. We all needed to hear it, because we've all danced around Victoria's behavior for years, making excuses, avoiding confrontation, letting her cruelty slide because it was easier than fighting her. Grandpa nodded slowly. What do you think she'll choose? Honestly, I have no idea. The Victoria I thought I knew would walk away without a second thought. But the Victoria who broke down at that dinner table? The one who asked if you hated her? I paused, remembering the rawness in my sister's voice. That Victoria might surprise us. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Grandpa opened a desk drawer and pulled out a smaller envelope, cream-colored and sealed. He held it out to me. This is for you, he said. A letter. Don't open it until after I'm gone. My hands shook as I took it. The envelope was surprisingly light, probably just a single page inside. Grandpa, I wrote letters to everyone, he said. Things I want you to know, thoughts I want to share when I'm not here to say them out loud. Yours talks about the night you saved that man's life. The night I watched you become the person I always hoped you'd be. Tears burned behind my eyes. I clutched the envelope to my chest, unable to speak. You're going to be the trustee of $21 million in property, Grandpa continued. That's a tremendous responsibility. But I trust you completely. You have something Victoria spent her whole life chasing and never found. You know the difference between power and service. You'll use that wealth to help people, not to elevate yourself above them. I'll try, I managed. I'll do my best. That's all anyone can ask, Grandpa said. He stood up, steadier than before, as if the conversation had restored something in him. Come on, let's go see if your sister has figured out what she's going to do. We returned to the dining room to find Victoria alone at the table. Everyone else had migrated to the kitchen or the living room, giving her space to think. She looked up when we entered, and I was struck by how different she looked without her armor of superiority, vulnerable, young. Almost like the sister I'd grown up with before Manhattan and Silverman and Associates had transformed her into someone I barely recognized. I have a question, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the redness around her eyes. What happens if I take the job and I'm genuinely terrible at it? What if the veterans realize I have no idea what I'm doing, that I'm just a corporate attorney who's never dealt with real suffering before? Grandpa sat down across from her. Then you learn, you ask for help, you admit when you're wrong, you let other people teach you instead of pretending you already know everything. I hate not knowing things, Victoria admitted. I hate feeling incompetent. I know, Grandpa said. But incompetence is temporary. Arrogance is permanent unless you choose to let it go. Victoria picked up the list again, her finger tracing down to the last option. Veterans Assistance Network, she read. Nathan said they need lawyers to help veterans fight the VA bureaucracy. They do, Grandpa confirmed. The legal director there is a woman named Patricia Monroe, former Army JAG officer, now runs the program with a staff of 6 lawyers and 12 paralegals. They handle about 3,000 cases a year with a budget that's laughably small for the need they're trying to meet. 3,000 cases with 6 lawyers? Victoria's attorney brain kicked in automatically, calculating caseloads. That's 500 cases per lawyer. That's insane. Nobody can give adequate attention to 500 cases. Exactly, Grandpa said, which is why they need help. Smart, capable lawyers who are willing to work for nothing and handle impossible caseloads, because the alternative is letting veterans slip through the cracks. Victoria was quiet, but I could see the wheels turning. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about the problem, the genuine human problem of veterans being failed by the system they'd served. Nathan appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand. He'd been listening, I realized, probably for several minutes. The average wait time for a VA disability claim appeal is 18 months, he said. Most veterans give up before then. They're dealing with PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, chronic pain from combat wounds. Navigating bureaucracy while you're fighting just to get through each day is nearly impossible. Victoria turned to look at him. And the Veterans Assistance Network helps with that? They try, Nathan said, but they're overwhelmed. For every veteran they help, 10 more don't get assistance because there aren't enough resources. Patricia Monroe told me last year that they have to turn away 70% of people who call them because they simply don't have the capacity. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. For the first time all evening, I saw genuine interest rather than calculation. What's the success rate on the cases they do take? 83%, Nathan replied. When veterans have proper legal representation, they win their appeals 83% of the time. Without representation, that drops to 32%. That's a 51 percentage point difference, Victoria said, the numbers clicking together in her head. That's thousands of veterans being denied benefits they've earned simply because they can't navigate the system. Welcome to the problem, Nathan said quietly. Welcome to what actually matters. Victoria stared at the list again. Then, with deliberate slowness, she folded the paper and set it down. I need to tell you all something, she said, her voice carrying through the house. Everyone! Can everyone come back in here? Mom and Aunt Patricia emerged from the kitchen, dish towels in hand. Dad came from the living room, where he'd been staring at nothing in particular. Uncle George and Dylan reappeared from wherever they'd been hiding. We gathered around the table again, a family reassembling to witness whatever came next. Victoria stood up, and for a moment I thought she might make another toast. But instead she remained standing in silence, as though gathering courage from somewhere deep inside herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear but stripped of the commanding courtroom authority she usually wielded. I've made a career out of being right, she said. Out of being the smartest person in the room, the best strategist, the one who wins. And I've been so focused on winning that I forgot to ask what I was winning, or what I was losing in the process. She looked at Grandpa. You asked me what I think I'll choose. A year ago, a month ago, even this morning, I would have walked away from your challenge without a second thought. I would have told myself that my career was more important, that $100,000 wasn't worth sacrificing my partnership track, that you were being manipulative and unfair. And now, Grandpa asked gently. Now I'm terrified, Victoria admitted, because I realized something while I was standing out on that terrace. I realized that if I walk away, if I choose my career over this challenge, I'll wake up in 20 years and look back at this moment with regret. I'll wonder who I could have become if I'd been brave enough to try. She turned to Nathan. You said the difference between success and failure is whether you commit fully or hold back an escape route. I've been holding back an escape route my entire adult life. Every relationship, every friendship, every choice. I've always kept one foot out the door in case things didn't go the way I wanted. Nathan nodded but said nothing, letting her continue. I don't want to live like that anymore, Victoria said. I don't want to be the person who stands up at Easter dinner and declares herself the only success while dismissing everyone else's lives as meaningless. I don't want to be the person who has a big apartment and an impressive title, but nobody who actually likes her. Her voice broke on that last word, but she pushed through. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the year. I'm going to work for the Veterans Assistance Network at $40,000, and I'm going to try, genuinely try, to be someone different, someone better. The room erupted. Mom started crying and moved to hug Victoria, who accepted the embrace stiffly at first, then melted into it. Dad's face showed relief and pride in equal measure. Aunt Patricia clapped her hands together. Even Nathan allowed himself a small smile, the military stoicism cracking just enough to show approval. I'm probably going to be terrible at it, Victoria said, her voice muffled against Mom's shoulder. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to want to quit. There are going to be days when I hate every second of it. Probably, Grandpa agreed. But he was smiling, really smiling, for the first time all evening. But you'll learn. You'll grow. You'll discover capabilities you didn't know you had and find satisfaction in ways you never expected. Victoria pulled back from Mom and wiped her eyes. I need to call Silverman tomorrow. Tell them I'm taking a leave of absence. They're going to think I've lost my mind. Maybe you have a... I'm back-aged, surprising myself by speaking up. Maybe losing your mind is exactly what you need. Maybe you need to stop thinking like Victoria Smith, corporate attorney, and start thinking like Victoria Smith, human being. She looked at me, and something passed between us. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but maybe the possibility of rebuilding what had been broken. Will you help me? She asked. When I'm struggling, when I want to give up. Yes, I said without hesitation. We all will. Nathan stepped forward, extending his hand. Victoria shook it, the gesture formal but meaningful. Patricia Monroe is tough, he warned. She doesn't have patience for ego or incompetence. You're going to have to check both at the door. I can do that, Victoria said, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. At least I'm going to try. The grandfather clock struck 11. Easter had long since passed into regular Sunday night, the holiday transformed into something none of us would ever forget. Grandpa stood slowly, fatigue evident in every movement. The evening had taken its toll on his 87-year-old body. I'm going to bed, he announced. This old man needs his rest. He paused, looking around at all of us, his son, his daughter-in-law, his sister, his brother-in-law, his grandchildren, his family. Thank you for indulging an old man's dramatic revelation. I know it wasn't the Easter dinner anyone expected. It was the Easter dinner we needed, Dad said quietly. Grandpa nodded, then looked at Victoria. I'm proud of you, he said simply. Not for what you accomplished in Manhattan, for what you decided here tonight, for choosing growth over comfort. That takes more courage than any courtroom victory ever required. Victoria's face crumpled, and she crossed the room quickly, carefully hugging Grandpa as though afraid she might break him. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on me, for caring enough to force me to look at myself. That's what love is, Grandpa said, patting her back with gentle, age-spotted hands. Not letting the people you care about destroy themselves, even when intervention is uncomfortable for everyone involved. He released her and made his way toward the stairs, declining all offers of help. We watched him climb slowly, one hand on the railing, each step deliberate. When he reached the landing and turned toward his bedroom, he paused and looked back down at us. Remember this night, he said. Remember that it's never too late to choose differently, to be better, to recognize that success measured in anything other than how you treat people is just noise dressed up as achievement. Then he disappeared down the hallway, leaving the rest of us standing in the aftermath of truth and transformation. The family gradually dispersed. Aunt Patricia, Uncle George, and Dylan said their goodbyes and drove back toward Richmond. Mom and Dad retreated to the guest room they always used when staying at the estate. Nathan went for a walk outside, needing to process everything in solitude, as he always did. Victoria and I found ourselves alone in the dining room, the scene of her spectacular fall and tentative redemption. She'd finally removed the rest of her makeup, revealing the face underneath. Younger, more vulnerable, more real. "I'm scared, Camilla," she admitted quietly. "Really, genuinely terrified that I won't be able to do this. That I'll fail, or quit, or prove Grandpa wrong about me being capable of change." "Being scared means you're taking it seriously," I said. "If you weren't scared, I'd be worried." "Will you visit me?" she asked. "When I'm working there, check on me, make sure I haven't completely screwed up?" "I'll visit," I promised. "But Victoria, you're going to have to do this yourself. Nobody can change you except you." "I know," she said, "but it helps knowing I won't be completely alone." We sat together in the quiet house, two sisters who'd spent years growing apart, finally beginning the slow process of finding their way back to each other. Outside, the Blue Ridge Mountains stood silent and eternal against the star-filled sky. Somewhere in the house, the grandfather clock ticked steadily forward, marking time that none of us could stop or reclaim. And upstairs, an 87-year-old man who'd built an empire and learned too late what truly mattered lay in his bed, knowing he'd finally done something that might actually outlast his wealth. He'd given his granddaughter one last gift, not money or property or status, but a chance to become someone worth being. Whether she seized that chance remained to be seen. But for the first time in her adult life, Victoria Lynn Smith was finally asking the right questions. And sometimes that's exactly where transformation begins. 18 months later, I stood in a courtroom in Richmond, watching my sister argue a case for a Marine Corps veteran who'd been denied disability benefits for PTSD. Victoria wore a simple gray suit that had cost a fraction of her Manhattan wardrobe. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She carried a worn leather briefcase that had belonged to Patricia Monroe's late husband. She presented her case with passion and precision, citing regulations and precedents, but more importantly, telling the veteran's story with respect and dignity. When the judge ruled in their favor, the veteran, a 42-year-old father of 3 who'd been fighting the VA for 4 years, broke down crying. Victoria hugged him, and I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Pure, uncomplicated joy at having helped someone without any benefit to herself. Grandpa had died 6 months earlier, peacefully in his sleep with family surrounding him. Victoria had completed 7 months of her year at the Veterans Assistance Network by then. She'd attended his funeral in her simple work clothes, no designer dress, no expensive jewelry. She'd stood at his graveside and promised to finish the year, to honor his faith in her potential for change. Now, with 5 months left on her required service, Victoria had already told Patricia Monroe she wanted to stay. Not for 1 year, but permanently. Silverman and Associates had moved on without her. The partnership she'd sacrificed everything for had gone to someone else. And she'd discovered she didn't care. She'd found something better than success. She'd found purpose. As we walked out of the courthouse together, Victoria turned to me with a smile that reached her eyes. "Grandpa would have loved seeing that," she said. "He did see it," I replied, thinking of the letter he'd left me, the words about believing in redemption and second chances. He's been watching all along. And somewhere I liked to imagine an 87-year-old man who'd learned the hardest lessons through the longest road was finally resting easy, knowing that love backed by accountability had done what love alone never could. It had saved his granddaughter from herself. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.